The Closet, The Stud, The Sewers of Paris, Revenge, The Raven, Cheer Up Charlie's, The Sweet Gum Head, Club Hangover. What do these all have in common?
Welcome to the wonderful world of gay bars! The modern history of queerness is tied in many ways to alcohol and drinking. Actually, not just modern history. In Plato's Symposium, dated 4th century BCE, Socrates and his friends are having a quiet drink and talking about love when Alcibiades, a famous Athenian statesman, shows up in the courtyard, very drunk and very loud, half walking, half being carried by a flute girl. We've all been there. And when he sees Socrates, he shouts, "You've trapped me again! You always do this to me. All of a sudden, you'll turn up out of nowhere, where I least expect you, and you figure out a way to find a place next to the most handsome man in the room." "But," Socrates said, "protect me from this man. You can't imagine what it's like to be in love with him. From the very first moment he realized how I felt about him. He hasn't allowed me to say 2 words to anybody else. What am I saying? I can't so much as look at an attractive man, but he flies into a fit of jealous rage." Absolute red flag. Then Alcibiades starts a long monologue about how Socrates is the best flute player and how when he talks it makes him cry and how he keeps trying to sleep with him, but he's a tease. Before he starts, he tells everyone in the room, "Friends, you look sober to me. We can't have that. Let's have a drink." Honestly, isn't that just a typical Friday night? It's like I always say, it's all philosophy until that drunk friend shows up and tells everyone they have beautiful eyes. Drinking can go very well, or it can go very badly, but gay and queer bars have played a fundamental part in the fight for queer visibility. Yet the relationship between LGBTQ+ spaces and alcohol is a complicated and bittersweet one. Drinking can be fun. It can take your inhibitions away, let you jokingly tell your friends about your sexuality or gender, and explore it with plausible deniability before you're ready to come out of the closet. And it also gives you the freedom to be out and proud when you're still learning how. But drinking is also tied to alcoholism and related health problems that are of greater prevalence in the queer community. According to Healthline, people who identify as gay and lesbian in the United States are twice as likely to have a severe alcohol or tobacco use disorder as those who identify as heterosexuals. Those who identify as bisexuals are 3 times as likely to have a substance use disorder. This goes even higher to 5 times as likely for those who are unsure of how to label their sexual identity. We have less concrete numbers for trans individuals, but studies show that they are also more likely to binge drink than cis individuals. A queer bar can be a safe space, but it is also a bar. But before we get into the heavier parts, what role did drinking play in the rights of queer people to be seen and to engage with others in their community? And what do you do if you're a queer person who can't drink, or who doesn't like loud places, or, you have a health condition that means you can't drink, but you're also deaf, and your hearing aids don't work in noisy clubs, and you can't lip read when it's dark, and honestly, flashing lights kind of freak you out because you've only got one working eye and no depth perception, and so you're just really relying on being able to see. Suspiciously specific. So let's look at the history and the issues of the gay bar. The history of gay bars. Just to be clear, today we'll be talking mostly about the history of queer bars in America, because there's only so much time we have before this video becomes unwatchable. Also, I have a toddler who requires a lot of time from me, and each history has an intricate, long, and distinct history of queer culture. Wait a minute, is it gay bar or queer bar? Is there a difference? The song definitely said gay bar. Well, yeah, okay, so let's take a second to discuss that. In some contexts, we can use the words gay bar, queer bar, or LGBT bar more or less interchangeably. For instance, in the UK, there's often an understanding that a gay bar is just a queer space. But in different queer communities, people may use different words to refer to very similar things. Particularly in the United States, a lot of what we think of as gay bar culture in the 60s and 70s was not only heavily associated with men attracted to men, but specifically with masculine white cis men. And many of the spaces that call themselves gay bars discriminate against people of colour, women, trans people, or gender non-conforming individuals. The kind of people who also would often not have as much money to create their own permanent spaces. More on that later. Some gay bars in the 1970s, for instance, would ask Black, Latinx, or women for 3 forms of ID ID at the door, where they only requested one from gay white men. So, in recent years, there's a trend in the States to highlight when a bar or a club is inclusive by explicitly calling it a queer bar, and there are also just more inclusive spaces. Between 2019 and 2023, the number of queer establishments that catered exclusively to cis men in the US fell from being 44.6% of queer bars to 24.2%. That's a really good example of the difference between both terms. 24.2% of queer bars are gay bars.
So people nowadays want to hang out together?
At the queer bar. Of course, before talking about bars in the United States, as a European forever, I should point out that also in Europe, queer bars and clubs are not a new thing, and have been part of nightlife for over a century, sometimes even longer. I say this confidently because I cannot do maths, and I keep forgetting that 1900 is already over a century ago. In 18th century London, that is 3 centuries. In 18th century London, we see the appearance of molly houses, taverns and clubs where patrons would meet with men interested in men, and where people would dress up in female clothes and chat to their other sisters, as they were called. In the words of The Secret History of London Clubs, published in 1709,
there are a particular gang of wretches in town who call themselves mollies and are so far degenerated from all masculine deportment or manly exercises that they rather fancy themselves women, imitating at all the little vanities and custom that has reconciled to the female sex, affecting to speak, walk, tattle, curtsy, cry, scold, and mimic all manner of effeminacy. At a certain tavern in the city, whose sign I shall not mention because I am unwilling to fix an odium on the house, they have settled, and constant meeting.
Ah yes, the vanities of effeminacy. Oh, you know us queers, we like a nice dress and a good gossip at the gay pub. The crime of sodomy could be punished in several ways, including the pillory, jail time, or even death, and molly houses were often raided by the police and their patrons arrested.
More police raids to come throughout this video.
This was actually often the issue with getting together at times and places where same-sex relations and gender nonconformity were either illegal or on unclear legal ground. Owners and patrons at queer bars and drinking places had to choose if they were in a position to fight back and demand better treatment, to hide, or to try to appear as respectable and law-abiding as possible. Often a mixture of all these. You're dancing with your girlfriend, someone rings the whistle to say the police are on the way. Quick, swap her with your friend and his boyfriend. You're 100% straight passing now. For instance, Berlin in the early 20th century was often fairly permissive to establishments that catered to male same-sex relations, and many of these bars could operate in the open, often under the eye of the hilariously named Department of Homosexuals of the Berlin Police, founded in 1885. Yes, already in 1885 the German police thought there might have been just too many homosexuals. And so in the popular bar, the Mikado,
the bar's proprietor took the men's bathroom door off its hinges so that no one, especially the police, could claim that indecent activities took place there. Opened in 1907, it drew a late-night evening crowd and became a hangout for members of Berlin's homosexual rights movement. It would plan its Christmas Eve festivities throughout the year so that these sentimental, rejected men without other family could sing religious songs dressed in women's clothing under the Christmas tree. Sad, sweet, Christmas.
So the bar was trying to prove that it was a respectable establishment, but clearly there was an amount of tension if it couldn't just let people pee in peace. When it comes to the United States, it has been argued that queer nightlife was more visible and integrated at the beginning of the 20th century, and that it only became more of a hidden underworld after Prohibition ended.
Prohibition was good for queer nightlife insofar as it meant that venues serving fairies, pansies, and other non-normative clientele were no more vulnerable than straight joints, for they all operated beyond the law and through the protection of payoffs. Rather, the repeal of Prohibition had a number of significant effects that created the conditions for gay bars to develop as a distinct phenomenon. In the mid-20th century, liquor control boards became the primary force regulating venues serving alcohol, at times explicitly forbidding venues from catering to so-called sexual deviants. The legal precariety of these businesses in turn made them ripe for Mafia control, which lasted in many cities for decades.
Yes, the Mafia is going to play an important role here. Alcohol and the law. So, when everyone was doing something illegal by going out for drinks, there was more buffer room for queer people to go out with the same degree of danger, to a point, as cis and straight people. But after Prohibition, serving alcohol kept being illegal just to queer people. Establishments who served alcohol to LGBTQ+ individuals were considered disorderly houses, and bar owners could lose their license for serving queer customers on the grounds of indecent conduct. Many gay bars operated as bottle clubs, where people were supposed to bring their own drink from home that could then be served by the people working at the bar. Love the concept. Who can pour this for me? I guess that is a bit more of an executive experience than pouring your own drink. While bars required licenses that could easily be revoked, bottle clubs did not. To give it plausible deniability, clients were also required to sign their name at the door, though obviously, most people used fake names. Duh. That said, gay bars enjoyed a different legal status in different states. The California State Supreme Court, for instance, ruled in 1951 that serving alcohol to homosexuals did not constitute a violation of the law as long as no other illegal or immoral acts took place, although this was later on reworked to become slightly more restrictive. Sadly, when you define something legally as indecent or immoral, it is kind of necessary to ask who it is immoral for. People have very different ideas of morality and decency. The idea of immorality that some people have had is a queer person just being visibly queer in public. It's not like this is legally a problem for queer people right now. Oh, sorry. Explain to me why your morality is superior to mine without any historical or religious context. No, seriously. If we look in society again, right here and now, who is inclusion hurting? It makes sense in a way that bars would be the kind of space where queer people would gather, because being drunk late at night is very much the idea of indecency some people have as well. Drinking also falls into that space where it can be legal under circumstances, but where there's an amount of regulation one can move around. In a way, queer people were able to use alcohol to justify acting in ways that would have seemed as not acceptable for a sober person. Goodness me, I didn't know what came over me, officer. It was all the drink. Food for thought. For instance, public displays of homosexuality were illegal, but this extended way beyond actual sex acts. Well beyond the 1960s, gay bar patrons would be arrested for hugging or dancing with someone of the same sex. There are stories that, in some bars, the house would turn on a special light to warn patrons when the police arrived, so gays and lesbians could just switch dance partners with each other. No, officer, look at my very straight dance partner. We were just playing musical chairs. There were as well a series of anti-cross-dressing laws passed at the end of the 19th century that kept being used well into the 50s, 60s and 70s to arrest butch lesbians, gay men in drag, and trans people, of course. These laws were also sometimes used as an excuse to deport people born outside of the United States. The last state to repeal a law banning a gay bar was Virginia in 1991. 1991? Yes, it was illegal to open a gay bar in Virginia in 1990. I guess we could be doing worse. Progress. So no hugging, no kissing, no wearing clothes, not buying alcohol. Wait, one of those is not right. There was actually very little room for people to go drink in ways that were in any way legal. Enter the Mafia. The Mafia, gay bars and gay liberation. So, you may have heard of the Stonewall Inn, where a several-day-long fight between patrons and the police in June of 1969 kick-started the modern queer liberation movement. Yeah, you've heard of it. I mean, come on, I've definitely mentioned Stonewall before, so at least you've heard it from me. So, Stonewall belonged to the Genovese family, who had a near-total monopoly of gay bar ownership in the Greenwich Village of New York in the early 60s. The protesters in 1969 were not only fighting the police, but also in part protesting mafia control and poor conditions in mafia-owned establishments. And the raid that started the Stonewall Uprising may have actually started, in fact, under the suspicion of illegal alcohol selling by the mafia. Remember how I said that people used to write fake names on the register at the door? Well, one of the reasons they did this is because the mafia is not your friend. The danger in going out was not only in getting arrested in a police raid, bar workers would also sometimes blackmail some of the patrons who were closeted or who had families or employment that could be threatened by participating in a queer lifestyle. The general lack of police interference meant queer people were able to chat and drink with their peers, dance the night away, and meet others like them. But at the same time, it also meant other laws could be ignored by the establishment, like health and safety regulations or not blackmailing your customers. Who needs health and safety when you can get wasted? Some gay rights groups actually blamed a hepatitis outbreak in 1969 on the conditions of the Stonewall Inn, which were frankly appalling. There was no running water behind the counter, and drinks were often served in dirty glasses, watered down and overpriced. What were they watered down with, can I just ask, if there was no running water? I dread to think. I mean, I can picture the angry Google reviews now.
Stonewall Inn, get extorted, chronically ill and served low-quality whiskey. 5 stars.
The bar also had no fire exit in the case of an emergency. In the words of Jerry Hoos, a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front, the bar itself was a toilet, but it was a refuge. It was a temporary refuge from the street. In spite of all this, Stonewall was one of the most popular queer bars in the city, particularly amongst trans and gender non-conforming clients, Black and Puerto Rican patrons, sex workers, and unhoused young people. We tend to think of Stonewall as the beginning of the modern fight for queer rights, and yes, in many senses it is. However, similar protests against the police and the conditions of queer nightlife also took place around different gay bars and queer-friendly establishments in the years before. For instance, the Pepper Hill Club raid in Baltimore in 1955, where 162 people were arrested, the Black Knight Brawl in Milwaukee in 1961, which was, according to some of the people involved, the first time they had seen the gay bar in the newspaper, or the Compton's Cafeteria raid in San Francisco in 1966. So, the Stonewall Uprising happened in part because there was already a sense of a right to security and to occupy spaces, as well as a public culture of gay bars and a political awareness of how important they were for the community. People started trying to make these bars safer and to give people the opportunity to enjoy themselves without being threatened by blackmail and the fear of legal repercussions. To this end, the San Francisco Society for Individual Rights published a little pocketbook in 1964 detailing what were one's rights and what was the best course of action whenever one got arrested.
This 1970 LA Flyer informs people they have the right to touch one another and publicly display affection, but of course not below the belt toe. That is illegal, still, in public.
Gay bars have historically been important centres for community building, places where queer people can get together and celebrate their identity, and also, often, the site of struggle and reivindication. Alcohol played a mixed role, both giving people a tool to justify gathering together in a place, but at the same time serving as a weapon by the police or the legal system to keep queer meeting spaces in a precarious semi-legal state. Because if it is illegal to harass queer people, but it is legal to raid an establishment because someone is selling alcohol and you're a prejudiced police officer, what are you going to do when you see a trans person or a same-sex couple drinking in a club? This, of course, also applies as an extra danger to other people who are in situations of semi-legality or illegality, like immigrants and mixed-race couples.
Unsurprisingly, miscegenation was also illegal for the gays when it was illegal for the straights, yes.
But let's not forget the long-standing connection between alcohol brands and queer nightlife and culture. Absolute Vodka started advertising in gay magazines The Advocate and After Dark all the way back in 1981, becoming the first mainstream brand in a gay publication, and of course it became one of the most recognisable sponsors of RuPaul's Drag Race in the 1910s. Yes, the 1910s. It became one of the most recognisable sponsors of RuPaul's Drag Race in the 2010s. There we go. The first national brand to run an openly gay ad, also in The Advocate in 1981, was Boodle's Gin. In the words of an editor of Genre magazine, when Absolute took the risk of placing ads in gay magazines, no gay man would serve anything but Absolute. These ads took Absolute from 5th place to the #1 selling premium vodka in the country.
The LGBTQ+ community has historically liked to show up for those who publicly support us.
This is still somewhat the case today. In the past year, with the rise of new anti-trans bills, don't say gay legislation, and drag show bans, we've seen some major brands such as Target or Budweiser walk back their support.
I know which light beer I won't be buying now. I guess not all alcohol brands stick up for the queer community. I don't know who I'm kidding. I was never going to drink that.
Studies show a great majority of viewers, 75%, are comfortable and supportive of LGBTQ+ inclusive ads. However, the minority against it has become much more vocal. According to RILA Global Consulting, during Pride 2022, there were only 400 social media posts calling for the boycott of Pride collections. Well, only 400. One is too many, if you ask me. It doesn't affect your life, Susan. Stop tweeting about it. But in May 2023, that number jumped to 15,000. Queer influencers have also reported losing sponsorships, and it's not just my friends, okay? Other people wrote articles about it too. So brands who were showing their support for LGBTQ+ rights at a superficial level are kind of just quietly leaving in the night. But you know who's still offering sponsorships? It's alcohol brands. Which isn't exactly on brand for me, considering I don't even drink. This wine subscription is excellent! The bottles are very pretty. I like how red it looks in the light. I am struggling to stop my nose from curling up, but at least it doesn't smell like paint stripper. I mean, yeah, it would be a bit disingenuous if I told you to drink Absolute vodka, but, you know, they show up for the gays. Woo! Maybe I will still get that Coca-Cola sponsorship though. So yes, actually, what happens when you are the kind of person who cannot or will not, just does not want to drink, but still wants to socialise with their rainbow family and go on dates, she says, as someone who used to arrive early, order before the other person and pretend it was not a virgin margarita? And what happens when you're too young to go to a gay bar? You thought I was not going to mention the youth? Yeah, kind of sucks when you're not legally allowed in the only place where you can meet queer people openly. And let's be clear, you can be queer at any age. So, on to the people who may struggle to fully enjoy the amenities of a gay bar. Drinking culture, community and access. Listen, it's not just an issue of being allowed to drink or not. I'm not arguing to let LGBTQ+ kids into bars, or kids at all. The queer community fought to keep these spaces open because these were some of the only places where they were allowed to gather, either safely or with a degree of expectation of support. However, it's important to make sure we also work to protect and foster queer spaces that don't revolve around drinking culture. That said, there's nothing wrong if you like to go to the bar because of alcohol and partying. The reason one fights to keep good things, in part, is that they make you feel good. I'm not here to shame anyone for enjoying socialising with a cocktail and a dance. Also, one should be able to wear glitter and a cowboy hat when sober and in broad daylight too. You do you. That is my political platform for 2024. One of the reasons it is important to have alternatives to the gay night scene is, of course, people under the legal drinking age are often the ones who need more than anyone a place for support. Being a young kid is a very disempowering experience when you think about it. LGBTQ+ kids and young people are more likely than their cis and straight peers to be in a position of housing insecurity. And LGBTQ+ people are less likely to receive homelessness support. For instance, based on 2022 figures, 41% of people who declared they experienced homelessness due to their trans status were denied space in a shelter due to their gender expression. So, maybe it's important for young people to have a safe space to hang out. LGBTQ+ young people deserve and need spaces where they can get support, information and community, safely and for free. And this just can't be the case if the only centre of queer life exists in spaces where they're not allowed entry or that revolve around alcohol consumption, which is age-gated. According to a 2022 Trevor Project report, 28% of LGBTQ+ youth in the United States have experienced homelessness at some point in their lives, a number that goes up to 44% when it comes to Native or Indigenous LGBTQ+ youth. Studies show that nearly 1 in 4, 23%, of transgender young adults between the ages of 18 and 25 experience homelessness, compared to 12.5% of the overall population of 18 to 25-year-olds. LGBTQ+ individuals are also more likely to experience substance and alcohol abuse problems. Because if you are constantly told your identity isn't real, or just a phase, or wrong, and you have to worry about your housing stability, ability to work, or just being harassed, maybe you're not going to be having a good time, generally speaking. So yes, a bar, maybe not the best place. According to University College London in the UK, the prevalence of depression and anxiety disorders amongst bisexual people was 40%, and for lesbian and gay people it was 28%, which was significantly higher than for heterosexuals at 16%. Similarly, illicit drug use was highest amongst bisexual people at 37%, while for lesbian and gay people it was 25%, and heterosexuals at 10.5%.
Alcohol misuse was highest in lesbian and gay people at 37%, compared with bisexual people at 31% and heterosexuals at 24%.
Studies have shown that cisgender and transgender populations have a similar rate of risk of developing an alcohol use disorder, although other studies suggest that trans individuals, particularly young ones, are more likely to binge drink than their cisgender peers. Finally, financial access to community spaces is also an issue for LGBTQ+ people of all ages. Generally speaking, bars are used as public spaces, but they still require you to spend money in order to use them, as a rule. And we should not forget that the LGBTQ+ community is, generally speaking, poorer. I know, it's hard to remember when we go around looking this fabulous all the time. There is still a large gap between household income of those who identify as LGBTQ+ and the general population. In 2022, 20% of LGBTQ+ adults in the United States had household incomes of less than $25,000 versus 14% of non-LGBTQ+ adults. LGBTQ+ adults were also less likely than non-LGBTQ+ adults to have household incomes of $100,000 or more. That's 23% versus 31%. For 2013 to 2019, female same-sex couples had about less than half the median wealth of mixed-sexed couples. Sometimes people joke about how lesbian bars are always closed, and it is actually true that historically it has been harder to maintain bars that cater exclusively to lesbians and other sapphic people, just because they are less financially viable. In the 1980s, there were around 200 lesbian bars in the US. It has now dwindled down to fewer than 30 by 2021, although it does seem like numbers have been going up in the last 2 years, so yay. When social spaces are ultimately built with profit in mind, it makes sense that they will accommodate first and foremost the members of the community that are more affluent, because those are the ones who are going to keep the bar open. This means that people who are in more marginal positions may find themselves feeling uncomfortable or unable to participate in queer life. Yeah, sometimes this is just a matter of atmosphere, expectations, and feeling welcome and wanted, but there's also actual physical accessibility issues for disabled LGBTQ+ individuals that are worsened by this for-profit model for similar reasons. If the only space for you to meet other queer people is a basement without a lift and you're a wheelchair user, that is really going to put a dampener on your experience, isn't it? Even though queer people are more likely than the general population to have a disability. I made a video on that. If you're interested, it is linked in the description. Due to rising rents and the gentrification of urban spaces, it is difficult for many of these bars and clubs to be able to afford the means to provide safe and inclusive access. Yeah, ramps and lifts are often costly, and often queer venues cannot afford or do not prioritise having them on their premises. Sure, yeah, okay, and those of you in England, blah blah blah, oh, everything's a listed building. Okay, I'll make that defence. We have other buildings too. Some of them are made in the 70s. Have your bar in one of those. They're very ugly, but they have lifts, or you can put one in. A couple of years ago, for instance, a lesbian bar in Washington, D.C. went mildly viral on Twitter when a patron who used a power wheelchair was denied entrance to the dance floor as the bar couldn't guarantee it was safe for the person using the power chair. Is your floor going to crack and fall in? What? Clubs also tend to be dark and loud spaces, which are often difficult to manage for people with hearing impairments or sensory issues. People with chronic illnesses, fatigue, or people who cannot drink alcohol due to gastric issues also struggle to find a place in bar culture. And many times all those people are the same person, because very often things add up. Thankfully now, with the greater visibility these issues are receiving and the ability to exist in broad daylight without being attacked or arrested, alternative spaces such as queer cafes, restaurants, and other non-profit events and organisations have emerged that try to ensure the accessibility of the community. Queer disabled activists have also been spreading awareness about physical and sensorial needs, for instance, by providing checklists of things to avoid or ensure at different events or venues. We also have online spaces. Woo! In conclusion, the LGBTQ+ community has always fought for the right to have spaces where we can feel able to be who we are and create community, also just for the right to have fun. Gay bars were often precious for people, even though they were dangerous and insalubrious, not because they offered just alcohol and partying, people fought and still fight to preserve, maintain and better spaces where they feel they belong, in spite of the often difficult conditions in which queer bars emerged throughout the 20th century. We can see time and again the care and willingness of the queer community to protect them and improve them. And to fight for your right to party. Gay bars themselves have also changed, whereas before, when we thought of gay bars, we only meant the kind of establishment that served cisgender men, often not allowing women inside. The trend has changed dramatically in the last few years. Bars serving a general LGBTQ+ clientele have increased from 44.2% of queer bars to 65.6% between 2019 and 2023. In the words of Gregor Mattson, a professor of sociology at Oberlin College, all genders again frolic together. Today's gay bars, like their pre-World War II forebears, often host mixed crowds of straight and LGBTQ+ people. One of its last-ditch reinventions, drag brunches, have become a money-making staple of gay bars today. These keys to contemporary successes are a surprising return to pre-World War II ways. Now that gender-diverse people are more explicitly welcomed into LGBTQ+ bars, let us remember that this used to be the norm. In the same way, we need to keep protecting the spaces that allow all of the community to experience queerness, not just as a sense of identity or as a safety net, but also as a source of spaces where you can enjoy yourself, make some friends, maybe flirt a bit, and maybe relax with people who just laugh at your very gay jokes. Whether it be with a margarita or some Diet Coke. You have no idea how much I drank during this video. No idea.